Hey everyone, this is Randall and welcome to a special topics video here on the Imperial Minis channel. In this two-part series, I'll be taking a look at the best and worst combat units of each faction in the A Song of Ice and Fire tabletop miniatures game. Once I identify the best and worst unit in each faction, I'll explain what makes that unit so good or so bad, and then I'll offer some suggestions on how to make that unit more balanced, interesting, or playable. Before we get started, I want to give a few disclaimers. Not all of the units I identify as the best unit of a particular faction are broken or overpowered. They may simply be the best overall unit in that faction. They're often a unit that will perform very well in most of that faction's list by most players of varying skill levels. If I believe a unit is overpowered, I will say so and offer some suggestions to bring it back into balance. Likewise, and perhaps more controversially, all of the worst unit picks I make in this video are selected based purely upon my own experience and perceptions. There may be good arguments to be made that any of these worst unit picks could actually perform very well in certain lists or with the right player piloting them. But that could be said about just about any unit in the game. If the right list is built around a bad unit and a highly skilled player is at the wheel, that terrible unit could shine. It's possible to polish a turd into a diamond with enough effort. As with any of the units I perceive as overpowered, I'll offer suggestions on how to elevate these worst units into a more balanced state. If anyone disagrees with any of my picks or has their own ideas about how to balance any of these units I mention here, I'd be very interested to hear your suggestions in the comments section. Just like my other faction series videos, we'll start with the original two factions and work our way forward. This first video will cover Houses Stark, Lannister, the Neutral Forces, the Free Folk, and the Night's Watch. The second video in the series will wrap up with Houses Baratheon, Targaryen, Greyjoy, Martell, Bolton, and the Brotherhood Without Banners. Before we get underway, I should mention that, as of the time of publication of this video, an update to the game is currently in development, and it seems like the scale of this update will be similar to that of the 2021 version of the game. That is to say, it looks like just about every unit and tactics card will receive some level of attention in this update. This is great news, and indicates that regardless of anything I say in this video, most of the units named in the video will be receiving some kind of update over the course of 2026. Hopefully the units I flag as needing some change will receive positive attention in the update. Once the next update comes out and the meta has shaved off some of the burrs and smoothed out its rough edges, I'll return to do a Season 7 version of this series. As stated before, viewer feedback is very much encouraged, as always, so if you agree or disagree with my takes in this video, I'd be very interested to hear why. I don't claim to be an expert on every faction in the game, so I'd like to hear what more experienced players think of the best and worst of each faction. Without further ado, let's begin with the Great House of the North, House Stark. I believe the selection of the Tully Cavaliers as the best unit in the faction is not a particularly controversial one. The unit has always been very solid, but it stepped out from the pack when their Embolden ability was changed to Rally Banner. Rally Banner allows for nearby friendly units to heal when they pass a morale test. This effect combines with other similar effects like Dauntless or Eddard NCU's healing ability to allow for some truly crazy sustain. The combo of Tully Cav and the now free Winterfell Guardian attachment has been a bugaboo for Stark opponents for several patches now, allowing double Tully Cav lists to derp their way to victory in a lot of mostly casual games. As for how to change the Tully Cav, we are in luck because the lead developer Michael Chanel has previewed some of the changes to the Stark faction that are coming in the next update. He has shown a work-in-progress version of the Tully Cav that fully embraces the mantra of ABC, always be charging. The Tully Cav would lose its ability to allow nearby units to heal after passing morale tests, and now will instead do a big splash AoE heal to all units in long range whenever it successfully charges an enemy. This is, of course, a work in progress, so don't take this as the final product by any means. This heal will likely occur less often than the previous heal mechanic, but will still be a powerful, if more conditional heal. The Tully Cav and presumably other Lance Cav will also see a slight decrease in max attack dice when charging, but a slight increase in the minimum dice pool when charging. This new splash heal has the potential to be very powerful, and will incentivize the Stark player to keep the Tully Cav charging rather than getting bogged down, and will inversely incentivize the Stark player's opponent to keep the Tully Cav tied up in a melee, where they'll be sturdy but less threatening. I think this is a good change and makes Lance Cav do what Lance Cav should be doing, charging things and then getting antsy about being stuck in melees. This new healing ability is similar in spirit to the Brotherhood Sworn Knights Rally the Small Folk ability, with the difference being that the Brotherhood's ability doesn't require a charge, but instead requires an enemy rank to be destroyed, and it only heals 2 wounds to another single unit. Now, moving on to the worst unit of the Stark faction, I have selected the Karstark Spearmen. These guys look like absolute brick houses. They're stout Northmen wearing a thick pelt coat and carrying a wood shed door as a shield. But defensively, these guys have the same 4+, 6+ profile as most of the Stark infantry line. The only defensive ability they have is Stand Your Ground, which is fine to help absorb a charge, but after that, this unit just melts. It has Hold the Line, but this order is one of the least consistent damage dealing orders in the game in my experience, and it can be played around by your opponent if they time their attacks right. And the order does less damage for each rank you've lost, which is kind of the antithesis of the Stark vibe of getting stronger as you take losses. To fix the Karstark Spearmen, I would suggest giving them Hardened to allow them to block some hits for free as they get beaten up. Then I'd drop Hold the Line and maybe give them some kind of ability to be immune to vulnerable and or panic tokens when on their last rank. Both of these changes might be too much for a 5-point unit, but even just bringing them Hardened I think would help. These guys look like they should be fighting to the last man and becoming monsters as they take losses, so I'd like to see their unit card reflect that. Moving on to the next house, House Lannister. The strongest unit in Lannister should be absolutely no surprise to anyone who has played against or watched any Lannister gameplay for the last patch or two. For a long time, the Casterly Rock Honor Guard were the bridesmaid but never the bride, but now they're truly having their Cinderella moment in the meta. These guys are probably the most efficient 7-point infantry unit in the game. They're heavily armored with good morale, and they have a good attack dice profile, they're movement 5, and they have a crazy attack ability. This unit used to be 8 points, be movement 4, and require that you consume condition tokens on your opponent to get any attack bonuses. Well, all of these shortcomings have been changed, but I think the unit's attack ability has just been really overtuned. More than anything, the Honor Guard's ability to shut off its target's abilities is far too strong for an ability with no conditions. This ability to shut off target's abilities is something we've seen before in the Motley Armaments ability, but this ability has always been on units with very low armor who prefer a hit-and-run playstyle. The Honor Guard are, by contrast, a big mailed fist just punching you in the face, and few units can effectively outgrind this kind of a unit. That might also be attacking with Sundering and Vicious, and then be able to expend tokens against your defensive rolls after they've already benefited from those tokens for the purposes of their attack ability. Change this unit, all I'd like to see is them lose the ability to shut off an opponent's abilities. I'd replace that ability with something like may roll a highest attack die value. This unit's ability is already very reminiscent of a vastly improved Battle Scars, which Lannister doesn't have easy access to if memory serves. So I suggest just making their attack ability closer to Battle Scars, dropping this overpowered ability to strip opponents of their abilities. This unit already brawls extremely well without making its opponent's units essentially just a blank tray of wounds. Now for the worst unit in House Lannister, I've chosen the Warrior Sons. Now before the rotten fruit starts getting pelted at me or people immediately take to the comment section, let me say, I don't think the Warrior Sons are a bad unit in and of themselves. In Season 6 as it stands, however, I think they're pretty pointless. The Warrior Sons currently stand in pale comparison to the Honor Guard. They just don't do anything different or better than the Honor Guard. They don't attack any better, they don't defend any better overall, and they don't provide any extra utility or support that would put them in a different class than the Honor Guard. They're just basically the Honor Guard's cross-eyed understudy at this point. If the Honor Guard gets cut down at the knees, maybe the Warrior Sons can shine again. I think that, more than that, however, the Warrior Sons just need a rework to give them something to do outside of their Faith ability. They could use some kind of an Embolden ability that's perhaps dependent upon them having a certain number of Faith tokens on them, or some kind of Rally Banner ability with the same Faith token conditions. If they can't compete with the Honor Guard as damage-dealing brutes, they should do something different but equally valuable. Additionally, perhaps the High Sparrow can gain some extra synergies with Faith units to boost the Warrior Sons and the Poor Fellows. Now, let's move on to the neutral faction. These guys encompass a wide variety of units, from War Elephants to Zorse Riders to Filthy Hill Tribesmen. Balancing neutral units is a challenge because nearly every other faction in the game can include them in their armies. As a result, many neutral units feel ever so slightly underpowered, or at least close to just right for their points value. A recent exception to this rule was the Great Golden Company Swordsman debacle that caused an unprecedented interpatch balancing intervention by the devs to retune them back to a more balanced state. We're not here to talk about Golden Company Swordsman today, though. For the best neutral unit, we're going to discuss the Swordsman's ranged compatriots, the Golden Company Crossbowmen. Crossbowmen's abilities have not changed at all since release, but they were for a long time an 8-point unit, which left them almost never taken. At 7 points, however, it's like everyone saw them in a completely new light. The Golden Company crossbows provide a mixture of solid attack power with sundering ranged attacks, a high degree of movement with their sentinel ability, and a shockingly good panic profile for a ranged unit. Ranged units are often the target of early game crown zaps to whittle down their ranks. The crossbowmen are unlikely to take many wounds from such panic tests. Most other faction-specific ranged units have an 8+, 7+, or 6+ morale value. Crossbows have a 6+ as well, but with Iron Resolve they test against a 5+ when taking panic checks and suffer 1 fewer wound on failure. The crossbowmen work very well in certain factions and lists, such as Renly-specific Baratheon lists that don't have a native long-range infantry unit, or in a variety of other armies as a slightly up-costed alternative to their own native ranged unit. With the addition of free attachment points in Season 6, the Golden Company crossbowmen became even better since they're almost always going to have a synergistic attachment stapled onto them. I don't consider the Golden Company crossbowmen to be broken or overpowered in any way. I think they're exactly where they should be, and they feel like a solid value at 7 points. There really is no comments, no notes here on how to tweak them or knock them down. I think they're really just a perfect example of a very well-costed unit that provides excellent value, does exactly what it's supposed to do. Now moving on to the worst unit of the neutral faction, there were a few contenders, but I've settled on a unit that I have never once been tempted to actually purchase, the Stone Crows. These guys are a 5-point infantry unit in a faction with a couple of other very solid 5-point infantry options. Looking at the Stone Crows, I just can't tell what purpose they exist for other than to fill a fluff gap and enable some thematic Lannister lists paired with the Tyrion attachment. These guys are peers with the far more solid and utilitarian Stormcrow mercenaries, the more frail but super punchy Bolton cutthroats, and the frail but fun and better as they kill Lysine sellswords. The Stone Crows just do not do anything unique. They have insight so that once per round they can punch at their highest attack die value with Vicious, but they're hitting at a 4+, and their highest attack die value is only 6, so who really cares? These guys have Disorganized, so when they fail panic tests, and they will fail panic tests at a 7+ morale, they'll take extra wounds. In a world with many other panic wound modifiers already, bringing your own +1 wound ability to the party does not bode well for you. One thing they do have going for themselves is this reinforcements-like ability called Recruiting from the Hills. You heal 1 wound when you activate, then heal some more if you're badly wounded. Big deal really, because at the end of the day, what are you going to do with these guys for 5 points anyway? If I were to fix these guys, one option I'd propose is knocking them down to 4 points and taking their heal on activation ability away, so they're really just a squishy chunk of wounds that can slap harder once per round if need be. I'd maybe also nerf their attack dice somehow by reducing the mid and low tier of their attack dice so they're really going to rely on that inside attack once per round to be relevant. There are a few factions in the game that have a 4.12 wound infantry block that they can call on. Now giving that to a neutral, putting that in the neutral faction may be a little bit too much because it would just allow players to add an extra activation if they have 4 extra points left over, but it might be an interesting thing to explore development-wise. Another option would be to leave them at 5 points, but give them a persistent attack ability like Crit Blow and maybe panicking a unit when they charge. That's a lot of extra text though, so you might have to remove Insight. You could also give them a Stark-like ability that'll make them a bit stronger in melee as they lose ranks. In any case, though, these guys need some work because they're pretty useless right now outside of having some pretty fun sculpts. Next, we move on to the Savage People Beyond the Wall, the Free Folk. Free Folk draw upon the most eclectic mix of units in the whole game. In this faction, you'll see everything from fur-clad human raiders to lumbering mammoths, giants, and polar bear cavalry. The meta for Free Folk has stayed fairly consistent through many patches from a conceptual standpoint at least. The meta has maintained Free Folk as the Horde faction. What that horde is composed of has definitely shifted over the years, though. And this takes us to our strongest Free Folk unit. Without a doubt, the strongest unit is Varamir Sixskins. Varamir comes in 2 varieties, a commander version and a solo unit version. As a commander, he costs a total of 7 points and comes with his own solo unit and 2 additional solo trays, a Shadowcat and Wolfpack. That's 3 activations for the cost of 7 points. At 3 points, Varamir also comes as a solo unit that you can take with any other Free Folk commander. A 3-point beefy solo unit is pretty decent on its own, but taking the 3-point Varamir unlocks the ability to take the Shadowcat and Wolfpack as well, for 2 points and 3 points respectively. So you can take all 3 of these for 8 points if Varamir isn't your commander. These 3 solo units are not simply padding your activation count either. They each provide unique benefits to your army. But at the very minimum, these 3 cheap units allow you to maintain activation advantage over your opponent while also spending the rest of your army building points on more expensive or well-rounded units, rather than relying on a flimsy but spammy list. You can certainly opt for a super high activation squishy wall of bodies too if you choose. As for what I would do to tune down Varamir's power level, I think it's primarily a matter of points cost. I think discounting the cost of Varamir's menagerie when you take him as a commander makes sense, so I'd actually be okay with leaving Varamir's points cost lower as the commander, but perhaps raise it to 8 points rather than 7. The true abomination, in my opinion, is the 8-point menagerie of solo units. I think Varamir's points cost could be raised to 5 points so that taking all the animals would cost 10 points rather than 8 points. This will require the free folk player to invest more into the decision to take Varamir and his friends. Another easy change, I think, is worsening the morale values of the Shadowcat and Wolfpack. Currently, these animals have a morale value of 2+, making them virtually unbreakable. Varamir himself has a morale value of 4+, and considering he has some level of ward control over these other animals, I think their morale value should match his. This will make them more vulnerable to panic tests and lower their overall defensive profile. I've seen some pretty supernatural endurance from these 2 solos, and having unbreakable morale means that in most cases they're only concerned with passing their defense saves. From some kind of early clues about what the next patch will bring, it sounds like some of these unbreakable morale values are being changed, so I think at the very least when the free folk gets their next update, we'll probably see these 2+ morale values go to at least a 3 or a 4+, I would guess, just based on what kind of early hints we've gotten from lead developer Michael Chanel. Now, for the worst free folk unit, I have chosen Harma's Vanguard. I think the slot for worst free folk unit could be a bit of a toss-up, as there are several units in contention in my opinion, but Free Folk is a faction that has a wide variety of units that are specialized for very specific tasks or build types. In making this worst unit choice, I'm looking at the faction very broadly and looking for a unit that has the least utility for the widest variety of players of all skill levels. I'm sure there's someone who will jump to the comment section in defense of the Vanguard because that unit won them a tournament once or something, but I get it, you're awesome, but most of us are not. So what makes the Vanguard so bad? Looking at their base stats, they have the worst cavalry stat line in the game, making them even squishier than the super squishy Bloody Mummer Zorse Riders. Granted, they are a point cheaper than the Zorses, but I believe they are more than a point worse than the Zorses. Offensively, the Vanguard have nothing at all going for them. Ignoring their order for a moment, they are a tray of 12 wounds with a free maneuver each round and a movement speed of 5. If you aren't making good use of their order, they're okay objective holders and okay flanking finishers of injured enemy units. Looking at the order, I think more experienced players will get something out of it, but this order will just be lost or forgotten by casual scrubs such as myself. Getting the most out of the order will require positioning this super squishy unit in the right place to support your most critical units, which is a feat easier said than done in what is often a very crowded free folk battlefield. This unit's status is not helped much by its lack of any direct synergy with the commander that it's named for, Harma, Vanguard Commander. 2 out of 3 of Harma's tactics cards grant additional effects to Harma's unit, which will never be the Vanguard Cavalry since Harma is only an infantry attachment. Now granted, some of Harma's cards do grant some movement shenanigans that could benefit the Vanguard, but there's really no explicit synergy. If I were to fix this unit, I think giving it either one offensive ability, be it critical blow, ambush, or something similar, would be sufficient. Conversely, it could be given another order, such as mark target, tactical reposition, or something similar to cement its role as a support piece, akin to the Crownland Scouts for Baratheon. Alright, for the last faction of this video, we'll turn from the faction with hordes of cheap squishy units to the faction defined by a few elite, expensive, irreplaceable units. The Night's Watch has always been an elite faction, and with its tactics deck, its units can continue to become more elite the longer they survive in battle. There were a few units that could be in contention for the best unit of the faction, but I have chosen one that, no matter which list they're put in, they perform well and are a pain for their opponents. That unit is the Shadow Tower Spearmen. Like most Night's Watch infantry units, the Shadow Tower Spearmen come in at 7 points. Unlike all other Night's Watch infantry, however, the Spearmen boast an impressive 3+ defensive stat. Combined with their 5+ morale and 5 movement speed, these guys' defensive profile is among the most elite in the game for infantry units, matched only by the Casterly Rock Honor Guard from House Lannister, who share the same defensive stats. Offensively, the Shadow Tower Spearmen are natively less impressive than the Honor Guard. The Spearmen have a pretty typical Spear and Pike dice profile at 7/7/4, but unlike most other Spear, Pike, and Halberd units, they hit at an elite 3+. They have no native keywords, so most of the time they'll just be throwing 7 unmodified dice. Their most powerful ability, aside from their raw defensive and offensive stats, is their set for charge order. With set for charge, these guys become a very unappealing target to dive into. Other units in the game with the set for charge order boast only a 4+ defensive stat, meaning that even after they poke the attacker, they'll probably still take a handful of wounds from the charging attack. The Shadow Tower Spearman's 3+ defensive stat means that their charging attacker is unlikely to deal a huge amount of damage without bringing Sundering or a flanking attack with them. What tipped this unit over the edge into most powerful territory, though, was the potential pairings it can and often does receive with respect to unit attachments. I typically don't want to consider unit attachments when deciding which unit in a faction is the most powerful, but in cases where there are several close contenders, attachment potential can be the tiebreaker. In this case, the Shadow Tower Spearmen make excellent use of the game's recently added 4-point free attachment allowance. The Night's Watch is a faction with a number of powerful attachments and a variety of other very useful attachments for specific list builds. In my experience, I have regularly seen the Watch Captain stapled to Shadow Tower Spearmen, making them an absolutely terrifying unit to see moving up the center of the table at you. With a Watch Captain attached, if you charge this unit, you will suffer a preemptive set for charge attack, and then a free relentless attack after you complete your attack, and due to boldness and courage, the Spearmen will be rolling their highest attack die value all the way down to 1 rank. With this attachment combination, you have to very seriously consider whether your healthy unit will delete itself by charging into this Night's Watch unit. The Spearman's only real weakness is being shot at by range attacks, but woe betide any friendly unit that's engaged with them when the Spearmen are shot at range, since that engaged unit will immediately suffer a free relentless attack. Another decent attachment for the Spearmen is Corrin, who gives them battle scars, granting them powerful offensive abilities and an additional source of free damage with go down fighting. Alright, so how would I propose changing these guys to tone down their power level a little bit? First of all, I think it's crazy that these guys are a 3+ on defense. These guys don't have shields or full plate armor, and yes, I know that the developers have gone on the record in the past saying that the defensive stat is more inclusive than strictly armor, but these guys are just a big blunt object that doesn't really jive with the Night Watch's design. I think these guys should be brought down to a 4+ armor save, but perhaps be given some kind of additional ability and compensation. I don't think Sundering is appropriate, nor is Precision, since the veterans already have that. Critical Blow seems like it could be a decent differentiating ability for these guys. It gives their set for charge the potential to be pretty explosive, but dropping the unit to a 4+ defensive stat makes the player need to put some more thought into how to properly deploy and utilize them. I think this is a fair trade-off that'll still make for a solid 7-point unit. I do realize I'm offering Critical Blow as kind of a way to spruce up some units or change some units a lot, but, you know, take that for what it is. Now let's look at the current worst unit in the faction. For the worst unit, I'm turning to the former darling of the faction, the Conscripts. Prior to the redesign of the Night's Watch deck, the Conscripts were found in just about every competitive Night's Watch list, it seemed, and it's because it allowed the rest of your units to remain relatively healthy. Night's Watch gameplay in previous versions seemed to reward a very Death Star style strategy, since the Night's Watch's vow cards could never be removed from their units. As such, you could have these immensely powerful units by the end of the game that were far too precious to risk losing. So you're perfectly happy to bring along a 5-point unit of Conscripts to keep your Death Star units healthy. Nowadays, the Night's Watch vow cards can be stripped off of units, so you can't count on a couple of super juiced up units carrying you to victory while a bloodbag unit of Conscripts skulks around behind your front line. Now, your army building points need to be spent more carefully on units that will be actively doing something more than feeding wounds to other units. Your units now need to be killing enemy units, holding onto objectives, or threatening your opponent's flanks or vulnerable units. Conscripts can't do any of these things effectively, aside from perhaps holding an objective, as long as they don't get panic tested. The Conscripts at 5 points are worse than the neutral Stone Crows that we discussed in our best and worst neutral section. The Conscripts have the same attack profile as the Stone Crows, a worse defensive stat, and they bring the same disorganized ability that the Stone Crows have. Unlike the Stone Crows, however, the Conscripts have no offensive or defensive abilities whatsoever. They exist to do one thing: provide wounds to other, better Night's Watch units. In this version of the game, that's just not enough to justify taking up one of the Night's Watch's valuable combat unit slots. To fix the conscripts, I suggest a complete overhaul of their abilities. First, they should lose Disorganized. This negative ability seems like a relic of older design principles in the game. In compensation, the conscripts could drop to an 8+ morale. These guys aren't passing panic tests reliably anyway. I'd next get rid of Supply Aid. As an order, this ability often encourages passive gameplay and the castling of a few elite units. Instead of Supply Aid, I'd give the conscripts an ability similar to what the Brotherhood Sworn Knights have, where conscripts can heal nearby units, but only after they've inflicted some damage. This will encourage players to use the conscripts actively and throw them at the enemy alongside other more elite units. This will also play into the lore and suggest that the conscripts are villains and enemies who were press-ganged into supporting the Watch. I don't think these guys need any offensive keywords necessarily. They're not elite warriors, but you can expend some other resources to juice them up, either through attachments like the previously mentioned Corrin, or through tactics cards. To pair with this frontline support role, the conscripts can be given either gang up or disrupt, but not both, to help make the frontline either more lethal or more durable. These changes would make these guys a vital but vulnerable frontline support unit. I could see leaving them at 5 points since these guys really will only be useful when in danger themselves, and they'll melt quickly if focused on. They could still be used to camp on objectives, but with squishy defensive stats, they're not likely to hold an objective for long if contested. Alright folks, well that does it for part 1 of this 2-part Best and Worst of Season 6 series. In our next video we'll cover the remaining 6 factions with a slight caveat on the Bolton faction since they have recently received a mid-season faction update ahead of a full Season 7 update sometime in 2026. I'll provide my input on the Boltons in light of these new updates. It seems like the rest of the factions will receive some pretty major updates through 2026, so hopefully I can do an updated version of this video sometime next year. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Until next time, this is Randall, signing off.